Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Well, here we are. It feels like it's been a long time off, but we just took the week off around the Easter weekend. On the Ledge, back in business. Although the Ledge really isn't back in business here in Ontario just yet. We are still in the Easter break, waiting for the budget, and that's going to come next week. So lots to talk about in the meantime, whether they're sitting in the Ontario legislature or not. I'm Dave Trafford, along with Keith Leslie and John Wright. And my first question for you, Keith, would you do it in the park? Would you do it on the bus? Would you do it? Would you do it at the cottage? Have you heard that ad campaign?
No, I haven't heard that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is what they're doing here in Ontario. You can do it in the park. You can do it wherever, and it's about registering to vote. Right. I was waiting for them, John, to say you can do it in a canoe because you're Canadian.
Yes.
I think it's a relatively clever way of getting people out because it catches your attention for Elections Ontario. I think that really is going to be at the heart of this, Keith, in terms of the way this election campaign gets out, is how many people will actually vote. That's going to be, voter turnout to me is going to be the issue.
Well, and there's no reason for people not to turn out. I mean, 4 years in advance, we've known the election date, June 2nd. Pretty convenient date. Not, weather shouldn't be an issue at all. Lots of time for people. There are lots of advanced polls as you get out. It's a matter of whether the issues are there for people to vote on or whether they feel strongly about something, about, getting rid of a government. It doesn't appear so from the polls. I mean, they're not the most popular government ever, but they appear to be in the latest polls, in first place. The Liberals seem to be consistently in second. So what we're looking at is the budget. Everything's coming down to budget day. And, I think it was rather cynical of the Conservatives to say, you know what, we're just going to extend that Easter break right up until budget day. As if you didn't know the budget was going to be our campaign platform. This really clarifies it. So we're not at all clear even if the House will sit on the Monday and Tuesday, the May 2nd and 3rd, or whether they're just going to, launch right into the election campaign on the 29th. Officially, the budget day is basically the official start of the campaign. It's going to be the PC platform. And as we've seen, they need this time away from the legislature, apparently, because they're making announcements so far, spending cuts and tax cuts and rebates totaling $11 billion if you vote PC. That's some handsome change to be thrown around, and it's tough for the opposition parties to compete against that when, the major issue is cost of living, and it seems to be something the PCs are going to hone in on and address specifically.
Okay, so you've been down in the weeds in this, and we've all been down in the weeds on this, but you may know better than I, because I'm really struggling with this question. When the minister rises in the House and he tables the budget, it effectively becomes, it's in effect. Whatever's there, taxes, et cetera, and then the whole song and dance around, passing the budget is something else, but eventually it will get passed. This budget won't get passed by the legislature.
Doesn't look like there's going to be enough time, no.
No, so what really... you may not know this, I don't know, but I can't figure out what the status legally is of this particular budget.
Well, we went through it in 2014. Remember Wynne, as a minority Liberal leader, or minority premier government, they brought in a budget and they were looking to, trying to angle the NDP. They put in a sort of a non-poison bill. You have to support this. And the NDP said, no, we don't. And it worked. The budget became basically the Liberal campaign platform. It didn't get passed, but they got a majority government, and then it did get passed. So
we'd have to wait. I mean, effectively, if he comes up with some grand tax cut in this and doesn't get reelected, none of this takes effect.
Well, if you don't reelect them, you're not going to get your 5 cent a liter tax or gasoline tax cut. All these things everything now is dependent on reelecting the progressive conservative government of Doug Ford. And it's, as I say, it's kind of cynical to shut the House down right up until budget day. I mean, face it, you're making these announcements. You're announcing every day a new hospital or a refurbished hospital, new long-term care homes for every community. I mean, there's just tons of, the North is just being papered with money all across the North. I mean, the Conservatives are in contention, mostly an NDP stronghold, but the Conservatives are in contention and they're spreading money around to make it happen. I find it all kind of cynical, but it will work. Affordability is a huge issue. And when the government's spending your money to make life hopefully more affordable for you, it attracts voters.
Okay, John. So let's go back to your mantra about the recovery followed by the reckoning, and let's have that conversation out on the front porch as you like to do, because it's great for us to talk about this in the very minutia and the breaking down the numbers and anticipating outrage at some point. Where do you see this playing out?
Well, I think when you bring in the budget, it will, as you both have said, be the effective planks of the campaign. If the House just rises and goes or terminates, then none of that exists anyways, right? You'd have to bring it all back in and do it all over again. So, yeah, everything is dependent upon them getting reelected. Number two, the reckoning is such that what we learned is federally, they don't care, right? They just spend. It doesn't matter. So there's no sharp intake of the belt. There's childcare, more things being negotiated. So that's okay, I guess. If you're there, I think the Doug Ford government, though, saved a lot of money. I guess, look, I'm not a behind the scenes.
Or did it sit on a whole lot of money?
Well, but that's what I mean.
That's the accusation, right?
But that's what I mean. I think it's. I don't have the evidence because I've been looking it up, but it sure seems like when the feds gave them money and they gave it to the provinces and said you had to spend it by a certain period of time, that the government was able to utilize it in such a way that the budget officer in Ontario was able to look at their books and say, you're going to be ahead of the game and be able to balance the books in 2024. I mean, there's lots of revenue that goes on top of that. But, I mean, they came out of this better. And the city seemed to have got the money that they needed to from the federal government. So I guess the reckoning is going to be with taxpayers at some point down the road, and particularly federally. I think that the really interesting thing for me to watch in the last 2 weeks, which is not novel at all, but to Keith's point, they've been papering the North with a lot of things, but they've also been making the hospital announcements right in the breadbasket of what they need. I mean, they're in Scarborough doing those. They're in Brantford. I mean, these are seats that in one case, their sitting member only won by 200 votes. So they're out there, making the promises to do that. The second thing, we can call it a cost of living budget, but it's also a commuter budget. This is a 905 budget. This is, let's give you money on the gas tax, some kind of rebate. Let us cancel your sticker fees and you can put it towards more gas and things like that. I mean, yes, it is all about the cost of living, but I see more in this being about the 905 region than I do about the further north and in Toronto proper. Thirdly, though, I think you have to watch where the Liberals are in all of this because the numbers are starting to tighten up. There's obviously some interest in going back to the Liberals without knowing the brand or supporting the brand as it was compared to the brand that's new under Mr. Del Duca. So I wondered whether or not part of what they've been throwing out in the last few weeks has been more to make sure that they're holding the 905, because when I look at the numbers are split between the Liberals and the Conservatives, almost dead even for their proportion of the vote there. And there's no advantage necessarily for the Conservatives. So some of the stuff that they've been pitching out there, I think, is also aimed at that band. So I think they go into this, in a fairly healthy way, the government does. But my eyes, again, will always be on the 905 and to see what comes there. And, we'll see.
Well, one of the things, though, that occurred to me this week is that the Liberal campaign, the War Room, must be sort of in a circle just looking at each other. And that's the only thing they're paying attention to, Keith. That this tone-deaf announcement about banning handguns across the province. Now, nobody on this podcast is cheering for gun violence or gangs or anything else because that's where they go. Well, you must, how can you not do this because people are getting killed in the streets? Chris Lewis, former OPP commissioner, just nailed it this week. He said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of stupid things.
Absolutely. I mean, what are you doing? You're going to ban handguns. Well, who has handguns? Legal owners. And who's using them illegally? Criminals. Are they going to stop? Well, they're not going to register their handguns in the first place. The idea is to get them out of the hands of the criminals, the illegal guns. Targeting legal handgun owners who, may have target practice, shooting ranges, that sort of thing. That's insanity. It's just, you're just driving votes to the Conservatives. And the NDP have sort of piled on and said, we too, we'll get rid of the guns. It's just, who's asking for this? A couple of ridings in Scarborough where it's certainly been an issue. And there is a guns and gangs issue, but the government comes back with, we put $185 million into guns and gangs specifically to target this. That's a pretty reasoned argument. I mean, we need to stop the guns at the border. We know that. We need to stop theft of handguns. But, well, we're not hearing about big thefts of handguns, are we? It's mostly illegal guns coming across the border. Police have to deal with that. It's a huge issue. $185 million is a fair chunk of change to try and deal with something like that. For the opposition parties to think this is something that's a chink in the armor, that Doug Ford is in the pockets of the gun lobby, Ford's best response was, they don't have to lobby me.
Yeah,
this is common sense to him. You don't have to lobby me on the common sense stuff.
My first I had two reactions to this. First of all, exactly as you say, there's now more penalties federally and enforcement municipally on this stuff, that adding a provincial layer to all of that is not useful at all. But when I heard it, it seems strange to me. But again, let's go back to the 905 for a moment. Let's go back to where Bill Blair made the announcement up in Markham during the federal campaign on assault weapons. You and I know that if the Liberals had said, we're proposing a cross-border task force to try and crack down on illegal guns coming north of the border, and we're going to do that, that would make common sense to put something out there and to do it in a joint task force with a bunch of other people. But I'm just speculating on this. I wonder whether or not part of this strategy about the handguns was not necessarily aimed at the broader population, but maybe it was aimed in Scarborough, but primarily in the 905. It seemed to me it was following in the footsteps of the Trudeau campaign more than anything else. But it looked really silly.
Guns only became an issue. Guns are only an issue if someone screws up, like O'Toole did in the federal campaign. Said one thing in his policy, said another. That's when Canadians go, wait, what is your position on assault rifles? All of a sudden, now I do care. But for the most part, we expect those things to be banned. We expect, mass shooting weapons not to be available in Canada, and everything else is, people are satisfied.
But it's a federal issue.
Yes.
It's got nothing to do with Queen's Park.
You and I know that. You and I said that. You and I know that.
It's trying to put a chink in Doug Ford. It
wouldn't be how we would have approached it, but it is what it is, and that's the only thing I could link it to.
But surely there has to. I do not understand beyond the very nuanced, subtle thinking that's going on around the edges on this. I find it hard to believe that you're applying that to an election campaign. In terms, right? This is not the time for nuanced discussion.
If you're liberals, go to some core liberal values that you want to appeal to voters. Take disability support. Been at $1,170 a month. We've talked about this before.
Exactly.
Since Mike Harris cut it by 21% nearly 30 years ago. You can't rent anything for the amount of money, and then you're supposed to eat what? Live on what? That's insane. There's a liberal issue for you. Pick these kinds of things. And I know they do address these to some degree, but there's a lot. Take the 413 study that the Toronto Star got a hold of that said the route the PCs have chosen will undermine the value of the highway itself. That just came and went nowhere. There's some issues there to be had. Mike Schreiner seems to jump on these issues, but he's just seen, as the Greens are repeatedly on that highway issue. There's issues to be had that the opposition parties can move on, and I just don't see guns as being one of any sort of mass appeal. Maybe John's right that it has. They're targeting the 905 broadly with that one, but I just don't see it as a big issue outside of a couple of areas where gangs are a huge problem.
It isn't. The number one issue in this province and across the country is cost of living. It's not even education, healthcare, yes, to a degree, but COVID's not prominent on that list either. It is about the cost of living. And again, if you went and looked at the feds and their first-time home buying program, that actually has some teeth to it. It really, there's young people who might have voted for a conservative who are now looking at that saying, yeah, it's a great idea, I can go for that. Why would they not have taken something like that, liberated it, built it around the cost of living, and put it out there to motivate younger voters who don't normally get out to the polls to get out to the polls? I think turnout will be interesting because the last time we had the federal election, of course, we were in the midst of the pandemic, and turnout was okay. This time we're going to have people in line, some of them masked, some of them not masked. They're going to be voting inside during the summertime where it's better. But again, it comes down to the raw politics of you've got to get your constituency out. Older voters who pay taxes are more likely to go out and vote than younger people are. And this is where that, the whole gun thing didn't resonate with me, even from the traction of getting young people out to the polls. It's not the issue. It's more so about their own pocketbooks.
The problem with it is that the Conservatives can now make it the issue about the Liberals. There's not a problem here. You have completely missed the target. You are not talking about what Ontarians are concerned about. That's going to be the line all the way through. And it doesn't matter if they come up with the gold standard housing plan from now on. Nobody's going to really hear that because they've allowed this noise around banning handguns.
Well, let's have a little noise around the ministerial zoning orders they issued this week that's going to allow 40,000 housing units to be built at Yonge and the 407. That's 60 plus condo towers, highest density anywhere in the country. And this is something, how do you address, we hear that supply is one issue, 40,000 units in one fell swoop. That's supply. This is something, I don't know what's going to get young voters out. And, no one's looking to live in a condo at 407 in Yonge, ideally, but it's housing, it's supply, and it's in the core. Well, what we now call the core city. You're in Toronto. That would be something that really will address the supply to some degree. And the whole point behind the Tories is we're clearing red tape with this. We're going to get these things built. We're not just going to say there's going to be 40,000 units here by 2030. No. We're working now. There'll be shovels in the ground. That kind of thing goes a long way with people when we're seeing, what other action are we supposed to see on housing? I see Maxime Bernier is saying, well, the obvious solution is to stop the immigrants. It's the immigration. I can't believe a Canadian politician is actually saying that out loud, going there. It's the immigrants that are causing the housing crisis, but he is out doing that. So hopefully that nonsense stays out of Ontario politics, out of the election campaign. But I think 40,000 housing units is a significant announcement for a government. And, cutting the MZO to clear away the red tape, people will appreciate that, I think, to some degree, once they understand what's being said here. But the fact that it's not just announced, it's going to be built quickly, it's a huge deal.
Well, but will that have some kind of an effect on the housing prices, et cetera? I mean, there's that. I still think that the housing has to be a large toolkit with a whole bunch of specific tools in it. That might be one of them, and eliminating red tape might be the other. But let's face it, we had Jeff Lehman on the show about a month ago, and he's running up in Barrie, the mayor of Barrie now. Smart guy. I think he's got clearly is going to have an inside track. If anybody's going to unseat the Tories there, it's probably going to be him. But when we challenged him on the housing thing to say it's a municipal issue, it's your zoning, you need an oversight from the province, he pushed back on that. I mean, if you look from municipality to municipality, I get that there's unique characteristics, each one has its own certain conditions, its own demographic and so on. But in a broader way, this is where the province and the Liberals could be stepping up and saying, we need sort of this gentler density in some areas. We're going to have this kind of development along certain corridors in Toronto, for example. There's room for that, but they don't. They don't go there.
They don't even address the missing middle. Is something that's talked about only by people with sort of insider knowledge of the housing issue. Broader people, most people don't even are aware of that. It's such a basic zoning issue that you could allow 2 or 3 unit buildings in residential neighborhoods that are now one family unit only. You can't even have a basement suite. No. This is how you address things. You establish but is there going to be pushback from the neighbors that have single family units and don't want a 2 or 3 unit family unit living next to them? There will be. But eventually, this is the way it has to be addressed. Otherwise, there's only so many routes we can expand. We're getting so far out, the sprawl, all of that. You can't commute. I mean, well, you can commute from London if you want to Toronto. It's being done. But how healthy a lifestyle is that? It has to be addressed as a whole.
Well, I mean, the quickest way to this is to say that the Liberals are more about pistols than they are about pocketbooks. Yeah. The second thing is that if you look at the Yonge subway line and you look at the development of condominiums along that route, forget about going into Vaughan and places like that, it's exactly what's happened. I mean, Yonge and Eglinton used to be young and eligible, and it was just a few apartment buildings in a nice part of the Midtown, and now it's just massive condominiums on top of that. The only area that's not built up in that same way has got to be Yonge and Lawrence. But if you go south of that and north of that, it certainly has. So it's vectoring up there so that you've got an extra stop now being put in for subway. at least there's some semblance of a plan when it's headed that way. But to your point, it gives the Conservatives a plank, and it allows them to say we're addressing these things. And it may not be exactly what everybody wants, but it provides them with that incentive for people to go out and vote for them. And it also, you take a look where the highway is going to be up there. It's all kind of interconnected with that 905 area. But I think I don't know where the Liberals are going to be, because the other thing, too, is that they don't have any money.
They don't need money to come up with a policy, though, that says, as a government.
But what are we talking about?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, as a government, we will impose a zoning order on all municipalities that says you must allow this type of density. Now, you take the responsibility away from the municipalities who are going to fight you every step of the way because they're getting voted directly, and their voters are going to like that. If you do it on a provincial level, you might get away with it. It takes leadership. Something is going to need to be done here. Leadership is going to have to come from the province on this, because we've seen, as Dave says, the mayors are very quick to say, well, there's this. There's lots of local issues, lots of local things that are local areas of importance. A provincial standard is the only way we're going to get that missing middle ever built and really bring down housing and get people into not farther flung neighborhoods, but into existing neighborhoods that are already serviced.
So 2 things on that. That makes sense with the municipal group, but again, you may get backlash from all of those cities, and that you're the party that's trying to manage that area of jurisdiction and the economy, all that sort of stuff. But the only thing I would give and we haven't talked about the NDP at all in this.
Funny that.
Yeah, but they're making announcements right now, both of these parties, where they're keeping their powder dry in the main parts of whatever their planks are going to be. Like, that's my speculation, that there's no way that, they're putting out a gun piece so that they can't get shot at for the bigger pieces. And, we'll see. They've got to keep they've got to keep their powder dry until they're into this campaign, because they don't have the money. And also, you don't want the government taking advantage of that and shooting them down. So, there's more to come for sure. But if it's not pocketbook oriented, if there's not something in it to mobilize that 18 to 34-year-old group, which is traditionally more of their constituency, then I think it's going to not work out very well for them.
So, the whole question, and we talked about it when it was first announced, that you were no longer going to have to pay for your license plate, the sticker, whatever. And I thought, well, that's okay. And I think I brought it up at the time. But big deal. I haven't paid for a license plate since 2018, because that's when I bought my 2-year sticker. It came due in August of 2020. At that point, they told you, don't worry about it. Don't bother. We can't have the service yet. They just delayed the whole thing. And then eventually the announcement was, well, once you finally get your sticker, you'll pay, the back fees that you owe based on when it expired. So I haven't paid for a license plate sticker since 2018. Tell me why I got a check in the mail. Well, I got a rebate check for something I didn't pay for.
Well, because we need your vote. And
it was only $50.
I got to tell you,
come on.
Put
it in your tank. It's gas money.
First time ever in November 2019, first time ever, I bought a 2-year sticker. So, of course, in November 2020, I moved out of the province. Moved to Nova Scotia. So I just wrote that off. That's, just the way it is. And then when Premier Ford announced the rebates, I thought, well, geez, I don't think I'm really eligible for that. I've been living in Nova Scotia for 18 months. And before that, I had the full year of driving on the 1-year sticker.
Yeah.
I got a $200 rebate check. Thank you very much. Who does the math on that? I shouldn't say this on here. I'm not giving it back. And I can't vote. But I got a $200 rebate check. I only paid $240 in November night.
And I paid nothing and got $50, so I don't know who got the better deal. But it to me, I can't wait for the Auditor General to dig in on this one, John.
Yeah, but it'll be all in the rearview mirror. Buying votes or
be like Serb.
All this stuff though is just campaigning, and we've seen it for decades. Ever since. Oh my God, ever. Again, I come back to this and say you have to look at it thematically as opposed to specifically. And the thematic part of all of this is pocketbook, personal economics, making sure that commuters and others who are in the main areas where they need to get those votes have got stuff in their hands to go to the polls with. You could argue that hoisting the budget is what you call it. Hoisting the budget and going to the people is a risk, but it also holds out this big carrot. It ensures that you are going to vote for that plan, that series of budget things, because it will come in October in many cases. But this is just a prelude to that. So
to what degree then? And we were all talking about the cost of living, and it's getting more and more expensive every day. To what degree, though, then, Keith, does inflation actually become a benefit, a tool for this government? Because at every turn, go to the gas pump, they're making more money, right? Every time you start to see inflation, we begin whatever we're paying our taxes on, our HST, all of that kind of.
The ad valorem taxes are fantastic for government revenues. That's all there is to it. Yeah, as prices go up, if they spike, 10 cents overnight, which is not uncommon these days.
Yeah,
that's a big hike for the government. Right away, their revenues go up. That gives them money to play with. As I say, they had a lot of federal pandemic money, but their revenues were up all across the board. Corporate tax revenues were up, but the tax revenues, the ad valorem taxes, yes, the inflation actually does help that. Now, there comes a point where inflation drives up their costs of borrowing as well, and it's a vicious cycle. But we're looking at, right now, the Conservatives apparently have raised all the funds they need to run the election. They can spend their maximum amount of $6.7 million. I forget how many millions of dollars it is. The Liberals are close, but they don't have the money, as John said. They've been in the wilderness for the last 4 years without an official party status. So I find this kind of interesting. It might be telling about the size and scale of the campaign and where they're going to target. Remember in 2018, we were all kind of shocked that the Ford Conservatives did not put on a media bus. Well, apparently the Liberals aren't doing one this time either. The only billing we've had a suggestion from the NDP, hey, who's interested in that sort of thing. Now, buses are expensive to put on. I always thought the Liberals made a profit on theirs. They charged a heck of a lot. We ate well on the Liberal buses, but I tend to think they made a profit on those sorts of things. But if they literally said, we're going to try and make most of our campaign events within driving distance of Toronto for the main media corps that follow them around normally. Mm. Is that, back to John's point, is this really going to be a 905 type campaign? We used to refer to them as 401 campaigns. They go from Windsor down to maybe, a little bit east of Toronto, but not too far. They stick in the 401. This one might be strictly the greater Golden Horseshoe area, as we used to call it, the 905, especially if they're going to need the media attention. They can't afford to run the bus. They're going to have events that are basically drivable from the Toronto area.
Well, but let's cut it the other way, though. If the Tories aren't doing that either, there isn't going to be, in some ways, it works to their benefit in terms of accountability, because even if you were on the bus, you could get a question in, or you could follow on, you knew where the leader was going to be on a given day.
Tories don't give up the itinerary. The Tories didn't even tell us where he was going to be.
Well, there you go. So trying to actually get questions in on that kind of model makes it really difficult. I wouldn't want to be on the assignment desk.
No, the Liberals say they will take Zoom questions or Skype questions or whatever from reporters who can't make it to the events. The Conservatives, as I say, in 2018, they didn't even tell us where the Premier was going to be that day. You might catch up, you might not. And getting a question into him and an availability, well, we used to accuse previous premiers of, being bubble boy. McGuinty's in the bubble. They won't let him talk to us. And yet we'd probably have at least one avail a day and still complain because we didn't get 3 or 4 avails a day. So at this point, you might get 1 or 2 a week with the premier. That's to their advantage. They want to jump over the heads of the media, the mainstream media, as it were, and speak directly to people through Facebook, through the social media platforms, and through local media. They're very good at dealing with local media as well.
Well, the worst part about this is how well the technology has evolved and developed. You've got DeGero boxes now that can broadcast high quality video from anywhere, and they make it sound like they're doing you a favor.
Yeah, and we've
got the DeGero box, and we'll shoot the video, and we'll set it up to make the announcement.
We'll make sure you don't get a follow up too, because one follow-up, which is always, almost always a second. We have so many things to ask. It's never really a follow-up. It's a second question, essentially.
That's right.
Sometimes you need to have 5 or 6 questions in a row to a person, a premier or a minister or whatever, to get, I'm sorry, you need a 3rd, 4th follow-up because they're clearly evading the question or dancing around it. You need to point that out. It's now the norm, no matter where. You're not getting to the 3rd or 4th follow-up question, and sometimes it needs to be had. And there used to be a time when there was a little more camaraderie in the gallery. If someone was on to attack and they got shut down in questions, the next reporter would pick up that same tack. Those
Yeah.
days are done. Their assignment editor is giving them something else to check, and they've got to ask that. They can't just keep, that's a great tack, but I have to completely ignore that and go on this because that's what I've been assigned to do. It all benefits the politicians who don't want to be accountable. That's it.
Yeah, I know, John, this sounds like two media guys bitching and moaning about, the old days, but this matters.
Yeah, I guess the reason I hesitate is because if I see it from a political point of view, it's completely fine. And we talk about limited access to Dalton McGuinty. There you go. Everything seemed to work out for him. I mean, elections are elections, and trying to convey that you're out and about without getting the questions, that's kind of the name of the game. And I think as well, when you look at how available the premier was during the COVID 2-year period or the 18 months. I mean, we said on this place at one point in I think it was March last year, get the hell off the stage. Get somebody else there. So they've been very judicious since about November as to where they play him. And there were major announcements. The other thing, of course, is that he's not attacking the federal government. The federal government's not attacking him. They got the daycare piece done. That's another piece that hasn't been shown since that happened, but will be played up during the campaign. I mean, there's enough there that I wouldn't tell you in advance because, number one, I don't want the media flocking and having microphones in my face. I also don't want protests. I don't want people who are showing up with placards who have been hired or sent out by the Liberal or the NDP to disrupt what I'm doing. So it is the era that we are in. I think the critical thing then comes back to the other opposition parties. That's what they're called, opposition parties. And they're going to have to put forward compelling planks during the election campaign to mobilize not only their base, but also young voters to get out and cast their ballots. I think the NDP in Toronto is in jeopardy. I think that, the government is going to target the ridings they've got in Scarborough. I think they're going after the 905, and they're going to leave the rest of the province pretty much wide open. That's the battleground. That's it. And if I look at all the polling numbers, the approval ratings for this government, where they're sitting roughly in the polls right now, if you take them all and you aggregate them and you average them, Doug Ford in all of these numbers and his government are sitting at 37. That's it. When you blend it all together, it's 37. What do you need for a majority government? 37. So they're right there. They're not sitting at 32. They're not sitting at 35. They're not under the wire. They're right in the sweet spot that if they don't get any headwind, then that's kind of where they want to be, not only at the beginning of the election, but at the end of it. So again, we used to say in the old days, just follow the buses. Mm-hmm. Just in this day and age, just follow the announcements. That's it. I mean, wherever they're announcing that stuff is where you want to be, and that's where the battlegrounds are going to be. So just take a look at where they've announced the hospital and healthcare things over the last week or so. There you go. Battleground 0.
Well, let's leave it here, and we'll be back next week, and we'll be able to actually have something of substance vis-a-vis what is in this budget at Queen's Park. Keith Leslie here, John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford. It's On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics podcast. You might also be listening to this in the Daily Brief feed, so we drop it in on Fridays because that's kind of where we are Monday to Thursday is in the Daily Brief. And just a editorial note: when the election is officially called, we'll make this the daily affair in some form or fashion, and we're already planning on getting out into the communities, finding out what some of these battlegrounds are looking like and sounding like. We've already been invited to join the discussions in Scarborough particularly. There's a real thought that a lot of those ridings are kind of on the edge and up for grabs, so that will be fun to watch, and we'll be there right here on the Ledge. I'm Dave Trafford. This is an Eye Contact production.